Hello, my name is Kevin Howard, and welcome to Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. Today, I would love to talk to you about our virtues. You know, where to start, right? Well, in America, we have four prevailing virtues that I think that all of you will agree to. And they are independence, freedom, self-interest, and competition. And those virtues are supported or reinforced by the prevailing narratives that are crafted by the establishment media that explain to us the events that affect our lives, whether they're local events, national events, global events. Okay. So the combination of these virtues, which none of us question, I mean, I have never heard anyone argue about independence or argue about freedom or argue about self-interest, the pursuit of our own happiness, right? These things are inalienable, certainly not about competition, which we learn from the youngest of children all the way up to the oldest of people, right? And so these are things that really go to defining how we see ourselves, how we see each other, and how we understand the world. So in episode 2, I discussed who am I? Who am I within the context of the fact that I had built my entire life based on these four American virtues and the narratives that reinforce them. And that encouraged me to pursue the American dream, to pursue earning enough money to where I can own a home, take care of my family. I could save for retirement. I could save to send my kids to school, to college. I could access health care. I could do all the things that allow me to reclaim my time. Okay, the American dream. Right? And so I built my whole life based on those virtues, using those methods, competition, right, to achieve the American dream. And I did. I achieved the middle class American dream. And then I found it to be meaningless. I found no sense of purpose in where I had arrived. So in episode 2, that led me down this path of saying, well, if I did all the things I was supposed to do, if I lived up to the virtues that define us as Americans, why didn't I find meaning? And so clearly I felt like I didn't know who I am. I didn't know the person who was staring at me in the mirror. So I went down this journey path that took me 10 years. And I'm telling you, this is not about taking you 10 years. It took me 10 years to figure out if I didn't know who I am, I need to find out. And so I started from ground zero, the most basic thing, which was, how do I survive each day? Because based on these virtues, I saw myself as a free man, living independently of you and everyone else, was empowered through competition to earn the material wealth that I desired in order to achieve my American dream. And so I was doing it. And it did not provide fulfillment for me. So if that wasn't true, who am I? So by circling back to the most basic thing as to my survival, how did I survive every day? I discovered the darndest thing. I discovered that I don't live independently. I don't survive independently. That I don't make the air I breathe, the food I eat, the water I drink, the house I live in, the clothes that I wear, the technology that I use. I do my part. I honed my skills and got paid money that then I turned around and bought all those things that I can't produce for myself from you, or I obtained it from nature itself. So I learned that the way I saw myself, based on these virtues that I had been taught from the youngest age, had obscured a reality about who I am. So I'm not separate. I'm not independent. And what's worse, there's no way I can be independent because I don't know how to produce any of those things that I need to survive. So in this episode 4, we're going to talk about how do these virtues and these narratives that support them convince me to see you? Because if clearly I didn't know myself, I probably didn't know you. And yet I'm making decisions every day. You're making decisions every day based on how we see each other. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to start this conversation stating what should be obvious. I am not just a Black man. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I look like one. I'm not saying I'm not a Black man. I'm saying I am not just a Black man. But so much of our cultural interaction is tied to the fact that I'm a Black man, right? And yet I am not just a Black man. You know what I am? And again, it's obvious. I am a human being. And so are you. Yet, by seeing me as a Black man, I open the door. This opens the door to the things that make us different, right? Because if you're not a Black man, then we're different, right? Because okay. And so this is a part of these prevailing virtues supported and reinforced by all the explanations we're given about the events that occur in our lives by the media, right? That fortify this notion that I'm just a Black man and you're just whoever you are. And the thing about it is everywhere in our society. Where do I begin? So from the earliest time, we get associated with sports teams, and here, whether it's Little League, even in Pee Wee ball, you got the red team and you got the blue team. And so in the game of Pee Wee football or whatever, the red team is competing against the blue team. And if you're on the red team, the blue team is not the team you're going to help. You're going to do everything you can to defeat the blue team. That's perfectly legal. The only thing you see about them is that they have the different uniform. Like I have the different uniform on right now. And so from that practice, from the earliest of ages, we identify with these individual characteristics. And what they do effectively is they reduce us to those things. So so now fast forward to adulthood, because it doesn't change. It only gets more intense when we get adults. It's innocent when it's kids, right? Because it's just games. But as adults, what then happens is we still see each other that way. I'll give you a tragic example, but it's the truth. If an airline is flying over the Pacific Ocean on the way going from California to Tokyo, and it crashes in the ocean, how is the media going to cover that story in the United States? Okay. They're going to say that the whatever airline number such and such had so many people on the aircraft when it crashed into the ocean and no survivors have occurred. And then the next data point you're going to get is how many Americans were on there. And the rest of the story is going to be about those Americans who were on there. And the other people on the plane, not so much. Not so much. Unless they were someone of particular significance. Some foreign leader happened to be on a plane. No, didn't, but it was just regular other people. No. There were 250 people on the plane and there were 50 Americans. And oh my God, the 50 Americans had a priest and that's what the story is going to be. And in your local community, if any one of the 50 happened to be in your local community, that's all we're going to talk about. because now it's Bob that we knew down from the grocery store that was actually on the plane. Okay. But for the other people, we're not going to talk about them. Why? Because, again, we've reduced the people on that plane to the people who are on our team. There are people who are like us, right? The people who wear in the red uniform when we're on the red team. Okay. This is everywhere. This is what we do to voters. We live at a time where we have President Trump. And so how do we think about people who voted for President Trump versus people who voted for Kamala Harris? And how do each of those groups of people think about the other people? Not too much. Not too good. So this podcast is about helping us to look at the effect of us reducing people down to these one or two characteristics. MAGA, American, not American, Black, white, Jewish, whatever. Particularly in a context where you live at a time when all of these things have been weaponized so that we could fight against each other. There's not a unique characteristic about any of us. We've even weaponized scholarship. Oh, you're an egghead. Oh, you have all these letters behind your name. Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're young. It doesn't matter if you're old. It doesn't matter if you're experienced. It doesn't matter if you're new. It doesn't matter. And we have perfected the art of reducing people down to these lowest common denominators. And the worst part about it is we never think of ourselves that way. And so by applying the breadcrumb that we learned in episode 2, that we survive daily based on the contributions of people, many people we will never know, and on many things we can't control, like the air production or the atmospheric pressure. Okay, right. And so therefore we live in symbiotic relationship with these things. And therefore all those things are important in order for us to live, right? So therefore we have to think of ourselves differently than those virtues are telling us to think of ourselves, as independent, separate, self-interested people who can only earn what we deserve in this world by competing against each other, right? That would be fine if we didn't need each other, okay? And so the myth of separation, the encouragement to see ourselves as the other, to see ourselves as different from each other, right, are intended to reinforce those virtues. There is a reason why we don't compete against the people we love. And I mean really compete, like we compete against each other. Compete like we're going for the job. Compete like we're going for the girl or the boy. Compete like we're trying to get the contract when only one of us can get it, right? We don't do that to people we love. Why? Because we don't want to make losers out of them. We don't want the price of us winning, the price of what we get to receive, the spoils we get to earn, to be that someone we care about gets nothing. But so how do we rationalize doing it to someone else? Oh, because we're in the blue team and we're on the red team, because we're in a competition and only one of us can win, right? So we only do it to people we cannot care for, because if we cared for them, we wouldn't want them to lose. We wouldn't want to win by causing them to lose. And so these become reinforcing virtues that allow us to function in a market, in an economy, in a society that has made competition the virtue, that has made the fact that I could earn my way to the big house even if that puts you on the side of the road carrying a sign. And so the breadcrumb for episode 4, for the fact that I am not just a Black man, that in fact I am a human, and that so are you, is that if we see each other's humanity in the same way that we expect people to see our humanity, in other words, none of us want to be judged by the dumbest things we've ever done. No one wants to be judged by the mistakes they make. All of us realize when we look in the mirror that we are multifaceted, complicated people that have strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons, good days and bad days, all of that. And that the measure of any of us is a much more holistic view. Who is Kevin Howard? Right? Okay. And that same measuring stick of how we would want to be observed, how we would want, if we need to be judged, on what basis should we be judged? Right? Not by our worst day, not by our dumbest day, not by one characteristic, many of which you can't control, but by the body of your work, by how you honor your word, by your choices over time, how you actually learn from your mistakes. Yeah, like that. But we are not encouraged to do that with each other. Take note of how we look at public figures. Take note at how we talk to each other in social media. Immediately, we are encouraged to reduce each other to a statement we don't like, to a position we don't agree with, to a characteristic that's different from ours. And on that basis, it opens the door to us treating the person in a way that we wouldn't want to be treated. And the thing is, it's really an interesting mind trick. Because if we are reminding ourselves that we're talking to another human being, then it will be easier to remember that even the mistakes that our fellow human beings make, we often make too. And that the time to remember that is when we are throwing the stone, when we're judging them for doing it. Right? It would also sober us up from the idea that because you made this mistake, that means you are, irredeemable. How many people in the current culture and in our current society on social media get canceled because they do something or they say something? Now, the thing about it is, I'm not saying what they did or what they said is good. No, it probably is bad, right? But we do bad things too. We make mistakes too. We have errors too. Would we want to be condemned forevermore because we voted for a different person? Because we happen to have a bias, right? Sound familiar? Maybe, my point is that we would be much more inclined to do unto others if we recognize them as ourselves. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is this. I have come through a process that I hope you're benefiting from, which is that the prevailing virtues of freedom, independence, self-interest, and competition, right, have encouraged me to see myself in a certain way that my lived experience has shown to be untrue. And that in discovering that, I realized that the same 4 virtues have encouraged me to see you and for you to see me in ways that I assure you are not true. And that the proof of that is that at the very minimum, it's not how we would want you to see ourselves. It's not how I would not judge myself based on the fact that I voted for Walter Mondale in 1984. That doesn't mean I should be canceled. It could be a mistake that I could have learned from since then. You see my point, right? But our society encourages that type of thing. Oh my God, you voted for Donald Trump, forget it. You must be a deplorable. You voted for Kamala, you must be a libtard. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we have gotten to the point where we throw each other away over the one mistake, the one error, the one thing that maybe should be punished, but not forever, not absolute. That's where we are. And so that also explains the magnitude of the vitriol that's straining our democracy. And so I want to take a moment to talk about truth as it relates to this subject. You know, since the age of reason, we embrace complexity like a virtue also. Like, that simplicity can't really be the answer when it's simple. And as we apply that to truth, we've made it this metaphysical thing. And how can how could you know truth when, it's all these complexities? No, truth is actually really simple. Truth is what happened. Truth is what actually happened. Okay. Now, the meaning about what actually happened can be complex, right? But the truth is what actually happened. That's really what it is, right? And you cannot get to the meaning of what actually happened unless you understand the truth of what actually happened, right? And so when we're talking about who we are as individuals, we're looking for the truth of who we are. How do we respond to things that actually happen? What do we know about ourselves? How do we feel about what we experienced, right? What those things are lead us to understanding who I am. And so when I had my crisis moment here, achieving the middle class American dream, and I felt empty, the truth of the matter is I felt empty. So the implications of that is that this must not be what I want. If it was what I want, I'd feel satisfied. I'd feel happy. I'd feel fulfilled, right? Okay, so then what would make me feel that way? I had to look for the truth. When have I actually felt that way? What things make me feel that way? And then start building my life on that actual basis, okay? And it's the same thing when I look at you. If I realize that I am not just a Black man, I have to realize that you are not just a Hispanic woman, or you're not just a Jewish person, or you're not just a Cowboys fan. No, I'm just joking. Just joking. That you actually are human. You are a human being, right? In other words, you have more complexities, and in those complexities is where I can see myself. Why? Because you breathe the same air that I breathe. Because you have to eat food in order to survive. But because many, many, many things that I do, you do. Many, many concerns. The concerns for your children, the concerns for your health, I share. Okay. And that my capacity to understand you in a truthful way is by seeing all that and not encouraging, not allowing myself to reduce you to something that does not reflect the full measure of who you are. And so that's why I named this episode, I am not just a Black man. I am a Black man. but it's not all I am. And that's not all you are either. And it's in the rest of that stuff that we can come from a place of authenticity to say, okay, well, this is another human being. They have, as a human being, they're going to have certain interests that are similar, right? On this basis, we can talk. Now, if you disagree with me on a particular subject, it's not because you're no longer a human being. It's because you have different experiences. Okay, that's fine. Let's get into it. And let's understand that, right? But the way we're talking these days is we don't talk to each other like we're two human beings who just happen to have different experiences and therefore have different points of view on a narrow issue, like whether Trump should be president. Okay? And therefore we fight and argue and bitterly oppose each other. Right? Because we don't see each other as humans. We see each other as MAGA voters and libtards, Democrats and Republicans, whatever, Americans and foreigners, any number of labels, okay, all of which empower us to dehumanize each other, okay? So what's my point here? My point is that we live at a time where it's extremely hard to find compromise, to find solutions, to work together in a context where every problem that faces us that's pressing on our lives requires requires cooperation, collaboration, okay? And instead of being able to do that, we are at each other's throats. We're at each other's throats. So how do we back that down without compromising our principles? We back that down without compromising our principles by going back to what is true. What actually happened that led my neighbor to vote that way versus the way I voted? Let's try to understand that so that we can come together. Because it's not because they're not human. It's not because they don't care about their children. It's not because they don't care about their country. It's because they have had a different experience. And that different experience has led them to a different opinion, and that's normal. And we used to, the irony of this time that we're in is that used to be normal for us to have these differences of opinion and not think that it meant that we didn't love the country or share each other's values. We used to embrace the fact that we had differences on faith. We had differences on the philosophy of the role of government. All that was okay. And then we'd go have a drink or go eat a meal or go, play some golf, whatever. Now we have let the othering, the reduction of each other to the worst possible interpretations of some small characteristic. Like the only reason you could vote for Trump is that you must be a misogynist. You must be a racist. You must be a homophobe. You must be, right? That's the only reason. To reduce people down to that, there's no more conversation. There's no way to collaborate if that's your approach. And vice versa. Oh my God, you voted for Kamala. You must go on, okay? We have to come together in order to solve the problems that are pressing on our lives. And the way we do it in a thoughtful way, in an honest way, is we return to the truth. And the truth is what actually happened. and the meaning of that truth. Now, that you're right. That is the heart. So let's talk about meaning for a second, because the physicists, I know eggheads, the physicists have finally come to a new understanding of meaning that I think we can benefit from. Since the age of reason, we have in all our sciences and our social sciences, we have thought that we find meaning by reducing our exploration down to the smallest part. And so the ultimate solve for science was, what was the universal common denominator? The the smallest particle that would be in everything that was in the universe. Right? Okay. And so they literally reductionism down to the smallest particle. It's how we examine the biology of our body. The physiology of our body is we reduce it down to the cellular level and try to understand it through its smallest parts. Well, the physicists have finally realized that actually meaning is not a function of understanding the smallest component. Meaning is a function of understanding how things relate to each other, how they are in relationship with reality. So you understand an electron based on its relationship with the proton, its relationship with the rest of the atom helps us to understand what the electron is. Fast forward to my exploration of who I am, right? When I had my crisis moment, because I didn't know who the person was in the mirror, because my life was meaningless, even though I achieved what was the middle class American dream. What I discovered was that I existed in symbiotic relationship with all of you, with what humanity produces and what the natural environment produces. That to understand this body was to understand that there was an exchange between these other sources that I don't control and me that allows me to exist. So I can't understand this body if I don't understand that it requires air, atmospheric pressure, nutrients, numerous things that it doesn't produce by itself. See, in relationship with the reality. Okay. So that's how, based on the truth, what's actually happening, how I actually exist, that I get to understand who I am. Now, the meaning, the implications of that truth is, if I survive based on the contributions of all these external factors that I don't control, right? Then those external factors are important to my survival. And therefore, I cannot advance my self-interest without considering those factors that I need to survive. And oh, by the way, neither can you. Okay? So let's round this round again. To understand the person in your mirror, you need to take a truthful look at how you exist every day. And you don't need a degree for that. You just need to stop taking it for granted and actually look at it. How am I actually surviving? And then take note of what's actually happening. Just in the meantime, while I'm having this conversation right here, I've taken how many breaths? You've taken how many breaths? Well, you've listened. Okay. Start with the truth, what actually happened. move forward to what is the implications of the fact that I need all these things and all these people in order to exist, in order to survive. And that will be the basis by which you then turn around and you look at everyone else, right? Because if you need the MAGA voter to eat, if they need the libtard as a technologist, as a financing person, as an artist, literature, music, whatever, it doesn't advance either side's interests to reduce them to this thing that then you can throw them away. Then you don't have to consider them at all. Then you can oppose everything they say because they happen to have the wrong uniform on. This is the implications and the point of episode 4. So, not a long message, not the 2 hours of episode 3, but a really important one. This is really about our personal growth and escaping the cultural belief systems that each one of us were given growing up in the United States that encourages us to see ourselves as separate beings, that encourages us to think it's okay to compete against the hands that serve you, the hands that you rely on, without consideration of what that does to their ability to support you. Self-interest cannot make sense in a context where you can't survive on your own. If you need all these other people to survive, then the only way to advance their self-interest, or advance your best interest, is advance the interest of all the people who support you. So that's the breadcrumb today. We need to have a sober look as to who we are, the person looking at you in the mirror. You need to assess the truth about that person, what actually is happening. And then you need to assess the implications of what you discover. And then take note how that changes how you look at the very person we spend a lot of energy hating right now. Well, that's episode 4 of Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. Thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing your feedback. Before I go, though, I want to acknowledge a few corrections that you all have given me, and I appreciate it. I do. This is why I'm encouraging your engagement. I had said in episode 3 that inflation had exploded under Joe Biden, which it did. But I gave the year 2023 as the year that it peaked at 9.1%. Factually, I mean, that was an error. And not an intentional error. It was really just an error on my part. It happened in April of 2022. It doesn't change the point that I made, and I make no, and I totally accept and acknowledge it as a mistake, but I wanted you to know that that came from one of you wonderful listeners who pointed out, oh, by the way, that was 2022. And sure enough, I looked it up and it was 2022, and I thanked that person. So put your comments in the below where this podcast episode is coming to you, right? And let me know if there's something, what you think, if there's something I got wrong. That's helpful. This is a part of the interaction. And if you're so inspired, come join the Breadcrumbs community on Patreon. The link is also in the description notes here on this episode. So thanks again, and you take care. Until next time.